Having experienced 2 earthquakes in the past 5 years, the Newcastle area is gaining a reputation for pioneering methods to reduce structural damage to buildings. Earlier this year, Council warned owners of damaged inner city buildings to get them repaired.
We're all familiar with the sort of damage that occurred. Most of that's been fixed up. A lot of it hasn't been fixed up to introduce any strengthening, so the same damage could occur again, and that's a bit of a worry.
Based in New Zealand, Brian Wood has been talking with engineers about proposed guidelines to strengthen structures. He's on a national committee in charge of making sure Australian standards are in place to improve the safety of existing buildings. He says Newcastle is leading the way.
It's followed right through to really now the setting up of this code committee by the Standards Association of Australia. That wouldn't have been set up had the work that was done here, certainly helped by the Newcastle City Council, had that work not been done.
Can you get a statement with you, Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, I've got my name on statement.
You've been reading it after the incident?
Yes, I read the statement a couple of weeks ago.
My question was, who gave you the copy of the statement? Have you always had a clear recollection of the event?
Yes, I have.
Is that those events at any time between the 8th of January 1994 and the date upon which you made the statement?
Only to the value of the loss.
What is the relevance of this witness's movements on the 3rd of April? The day in question is the 15th of January 1994.
Today was D-Day for Beaumont Park. After 2 months of boycotted race meetings by greyhound owners and trainers, the Newcastle Jockey Club pitched an ultimatum. Either put up 80 nominations for this Saturday's meeting or stop racing at Beaumont Park indefinitely. The NJC received 20 entries.
Well, I guess we were hoping that today wouldn't come, but unfortunately it has, and the greyhound owners, trainers and breeders' stance has ensured that, at least for the time being, Beaumont Park no longer exists.
It's a sad day for Newcastle's greyhound industry, which began racing at Beaumont Park in the 1920s.
Oh, of course it's sad. Everybody in the Newcastle district feels like that they'd like to race at Beaumont Park. Saturday afternoon is one of the avenues where some people can race and can't get to other meetings.
The battle erupted over a reduction in prize money following the withdrawal of full TAB backing in October. Concerned greyhound owners and trainers claim the winning kitty is too low and refuse to back down.
It's got to be a viable proposition as far as the owners and trainers is concerned.
The NJC and the Greyhound Group will hold separate meetings in December to assess the situation. While the NJC will maintain the track in the short term, it's also seeking legal advice as to possible uses and zonings for the property. Believed to be worth around $5 million, the sale of Beaumont Park would be a healthy money earner for the club.
It's a prime piece of real estate very close to the city, so naturally, you know, I wouldn't think we're going to leave it here for years if it's not, you know, being used for racing purposes.
Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
While much of the Hunter was treated to a spectacular show from the heavens late yesterday, the lightning's full fury was being felt in Cessnock. One bolt struck the antenna of this house in Love Street, sparking a fire. Despite attempts by neighbours, the house was gutted in minutes, taking with it almost everything David O'Brien and his wife of 7 months owned.
Everyone heard the lightning. It was pretty loud, and then the fire started soon after.
Today, David began the heartbreaking task of itemising the loss for an insurance claim. The wooden house had contained 3 generations of family history.
We've been renovating the house and all that work's sort of gone.
Meanwhile, it was an unseasonal start to summer, with the experts saying we can expect more storms. The Williamtown Weather Station says November's rainfall was well below average, rain was patchy, and the Upper Hunter is still in drought. Joanne Shoebridge, NBN News.
"32-year-old Hayes was the driving force behind the Illawarra Hawks team that robbed Newcastle of a finals berth in the last round of the competition. It's hoped Destroyer will turn saviour in 1995.
There's no doubt that Butch Hayes is a key player. He has helped lift Illawarra into the playoffs the last 2 years.
The Falcons' latest new American hope is chalk and cheese to the men he replaces.
Hayes is an all-round leader. He has the ability to get all the other players in the team into the game. Derek led by example in that he could really make it happen by himself and everyone had to run with him.
The signing comes after intense negotiations with coach Tom Wiseman, who brought the talented guard to Australia 4 years ago. That relationship helped to land the deal. Now Wiseman is trying to spot another star on a tour of the United States.
He is looking for a big power forward, a centre, and we believe that there are some very, very strong options for the Falcons there.
The club says Terry Dozier is still an option and could make a surprise return to the Falcons if the American scouting tour is unsuccessful. Richard O'Leary, NBN News. Councillor John McNaughton was a devastated Lord Mayor today. He only received 17 of a possible 72 votes against Councillor John Manning.
To have so little support is very, very disappointing.
The party's moderate faction won first line on the ticket in 3 wards, including Keith Parsons and Mary Gaynor, with Phil Jackson the only success of the McNaughton team. Mary Gaynor wasn't surprised by her moderate faction's overwhelming win. She says the party's grassroots members are sick of being ignored.
There's been a lot of discontentment at the cost of expensive trips, at the laptops, at expenses there, high consultancy fees.
What do they expect us to go back to manual typewriters and FJ Holden cars? Perhaps they like sulkies and so on, as get around in sulkies.
Mary Gaynor is already being tipped to be the ALP's candidate for the popularly elected mayor.
Well, that's something else that we still have to think about in the future. It's not an issue at this point in time.
But Councillor John McNaughton says he won't give up.
I was not supposed to win the first pre-selection 9 years ago.
Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
Coaching at Raymond Terrace over the weekend, Clark said he wanted to move to Newcastle to prepare for the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. But he stressed the region's track facilities would have to be improved. The sign at the Newcastle Athletics field says it all. The headquarters for Hunter Athletics has been described as dangerous, but it's unlikely it'll receive the necessary repairs because Newcastle City Council's behind a planned facility at Cardiff.
Council's supporting the athletics track for a new one at Glendale, which will be the regional facility which will be within the city of Lake Macquarie.
The proposed site for that $4 million development is on rail land, which the state government has been reluctant to release. The council is hoping Premier Fay will inspect the site before Christmas and pledge some financial support, but that appears unlikely. Maitland MP Peter Blackmore is heading a Hunter Region Sports Task Force report, which is yet to be made public. It's understood it highlighted the need for an improved athletics facility, but stopped short of saying where it would be located. The delays and politics involved in upgrading or developing a new track has angered athletes from across the region.
I would like to see a more unified approach, that they all get together and say, hey, let's sit down and discuss this and come up and say, yes, we will support, and we'll support one of them, one way or the other.
Selectors will pick the country side tonight during a telephone hookup around the state. Traditionally, Newcastle has supplied a vast number of the team, but 5 players are unavailable this season, including the experienced Greg Arms and Mark Curry, causing selectors plenty of concern.
When there's a good, strong Newcastle representation in the countryside has been good, but take our experienced players out of the countryside, as I said before, it's a different ballgame.
It's expected to open the way for a number of younger players, including Gosford all-rounder Andrew Sainsbury and North Coast opener Terry Baldwin. Newcastle's Paul Stambridge and Peter March are considered automatic selections, while Paul Ross, Steve Mace and Jeff Cook are all in contention for a place in the squad. The Northwest best hope is Gunnedah wicketkeeper David Marshall, who's likely to take over from Port Macquarie's Brett Rankin after he was unavailable for the Country Cup.
Well, David Marshall, who has kept for New South Wales Country before, is certainly their best prospect. They have a very inexperienced team out that way at this time, but certainly David Marshall's well and truly in running for the keeping spot.
Just on to a couple of other things quickly in terms of local.
Unions and BHP management have been discussing the deal for 4 months. A pay rise for 4,000 blue-collar workers in Newcastle, 15,000 across the country. A 4.5% increase, or around $20 a week from January 1st. There'll be another 4% in January 1996.
You never get what you claim, but no, we were quite satisfied with the outcome. BHP's made good profits and we believe the workers should share in it.
Workers will also get a $750 one-off payment. Under an enterprise agreement already in place, workers also receive a 5% bonus every 3 months if productivity levels are up. Meanwhile, Hunter Towage, a company 60% owned by the BHP, has chartered another tug to work in the harbour. The Ballina will replace the Awanui, which is returning to New Zealand. It's a sign the big Australian is keen to stay in the business, despite what's described as a distant relationship with other operators. BHP has 4 tugs working. It's created fierce competition. Fees have been cut by up to 25%. Peter Ryan, NBN News. It's not every day you get the chance to buy a diesel locomotive. And today at the old Cardiff Railway workshops near Newcastle, State Rail was cleaning out the back shed. 128 locos and assorted railway gear went under the hammer. The top price was $31,000, some went for as low as $5,000. The locos varying in age from 20 to 40 years old. Buyers included historical societies, scrap metal merchants, some private buyers investing for the love of the industry.
12 carriages and I think about 8 locos.
And how much does that cost you?
I haven't calculated yet.
It was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dr. Sharif investing in the gear to possibly set up a private rail system in Junee. The trouble will be getting the locos to their destination. None were permitted to leave under their own power. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
It looks and sounds like any other playground, but smokestacks cast a threatening shadow over all the fun. A select committee on lead pollution has found that children in North Lake Macquarie have higher blood lead levels, those who lived in the area and attended school elsewhere had lower levels, and the further soil is away from the Pasminco plant, the lower the lead levels. The report comes as Pasminco plans to expand its plant, prompting the committee to recommend tough new guidelines. It wants the maximum amount of lead in emissions to be cut by a third to 1 microgram per cubic metre. It's called for daily testing at the plant and an environmental re-evaluation of the Pasminco upgrade.
It must install the latest technology, the best in the world. It must be installed in that plant to ensure that the lead emissions coming out of the smelter are reduced to the minimum.
Pasminco has refused to comment on the report. It says it'll wait until it can give a detailed response to its findings. But it's not just these children affected by lead. 4,500 youngsters in the Hunter have higher levels than Australian standards. Much of that is attributed to the continued use of leaded fuel, with a recommendation to ban it altogether by 1996.
People who have cars now that need leaded petrol can continue to drive those vehicles. There are substitutes for lead. There are different lubricants that can be added at the refinery, and there are different octane enhancers that can be put in at the refinery also.
Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
After the loss of BP as a major sponsor in 1993, the Knights have floundered finding a replacement. Chairman Terry Lawler has announced today he's talking with the company on a deal worth at least $500,000 per year over 3 seasons.
We're confident the way those discussions are going, and we look forward to being able to hopefully announce some good news in the new year.
Also, a turnaround in club finances. During this last season, the Knights have made a profit of nearly $18,000, compared with a $240,000 loss last year.
It's just one of the steps for the future and for us to ensure that we're a club that can compete successfully.
This year's improvements come from an increase in crowd numbers, an average of 20,000 per home game, the art union and sponsorship packages. The club, however, is still $2.6 million in debt, but management is confident an announcement could be made by the Premier on a sporting grant to wipe that out. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
For motorists crossing the railway line into Gosford every day, this $20 million dual carriage overpass will soon be a godsend. It's estimated about 31,500 vehicles will cross the overpass daily.
But it will be the end of the traffic bottleneck problem. It'll be a marvellous facility for Gosford, beautiful and utilitarian, and of course it's long overdue.
The big task began today on pouring hundreds of tonnes of concrete. And a small army worked on the finish. The bridge has been designed to have little impact on the nearby Brisbane waters, with elaborate siltation traps to prevent runoff, and the effect on the visual environment has also been considered.
This bridge is going to be a centrepiece as well, just like the Harbour Bridge is a centrepiece over Sydney Harbour, and yet the whole program has been designed not only to be an engineering masterpiece, but also an environmental one as well.
The overpass should be opened by this time next year. Joanne Shoebridge, NBN News.
It was near perfect conditions for the final at Lawn in Maitland. 38 teams began the battle for the Jim de Courcy Shield, and today it was down to Glendale and Scone. Glendale won the toss and went into bat on a good wicket, the batsmen going for their shots, Chad Moore a little too enthusiastic. But Glendale's batsman Shane Scroggy was the star, hitting a bag full of boundaries in his magnificent 124 runs. Glendale scored 218 runs for the loss of 8 wickets in its 40 overs. Scone couldn't match that impressive total, all out for just 118. Both sides, however, progress into the Alan Davidson Shield for the top 16 schoolboys sides in the state. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
In these boxes are gifts of non-perishable foods and children's toys, as well as letters and cards made by children from New Lambton South Primary School. The school asked parents and students to donate items destined for families around Ralston near Mudgee in the Central West, where the drought has hit hard. IPEC Transport joined the festive spirit and will truck the parcels free of charge. Meanwhile, the people of Severnshire in the New England have thanked Newcastle and Lake Macquarie councils and volunteers. Earlier this year, a convoy of water tankers provided some temporary relief for farmers, filling dams that had run dry. 1.5 million litres of water was distributed between 100 properties.
Is building bridges between country and city, and I suppose by and large in the past we've all gone about our daily chores and not looked too far outside of those parameters.
It was a situation that needed an urgent response. An alleged gunman being tracked on a motorcycle. The Hunter's Westpac helicopter hovered overhead. By communicating with police radio, the crew of the helicopter was able to guide police to the area. Detective Senior Constable Peter Harris was in an unmarked police car. He and others have praised the help given by the chopper.
Westpac were relaying directions to us constantly via the police radio, and that enabled us to keep up in the pursuit with the Highway Patrol car.
With this week's arrival of the region's second rescue helicopter, it's likely police may be calling on the assistance of the service more and more.
I think it's important that we do have a helicopter up in the area that is available for searches when needed.
We have a house.
They started early, preparing the lights around Nobbies. Even the cliff face was lit, a concept the pigeons found hard to fathom. When darkness came, the full effect. The lighthouse illuminated for all to see. It's the idea of Peter Dormant, who's lighting and photographing 25 city sites, including the Carrington Pump House, the Obelisk, the Station Master's Cottage and Newcastle Baths, for a book called Illuminating Newcastle. It will be part of the Hunter Light Trail Tourism Project.
Would be a book that would actually show people the trail. So you'd be able to jump in your car or a coach and drive around the trail. Each page would have a photograph of the site illuminated at night and then the history relating to those sites.
The book will aim to convince the federal government to give $320,000 to make the lights a permanent fixture in the city. Also helping out is Shortland Electricity, which will supply discounted power. And if that's a success, Peter has even greater plans.
The grand plan is a dream, basically. It would be to monitor the success of the installation that we hope to put of a wind turbine up at Nobby's, and the measure of success there will be hopefully to power all of the 25 sites from renewable energy sources.
The lights could become a permanent attraction by March. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Only in this part of Australia did Aborigines carve tree trunks to form their initiation ceremonial grounds. And they were part of a display in a compound beside the Gwyder Highway, 25 kilometres from Collarenebri. The thieves cut the wire mesh, crawled inside and made off with the carvings. And no one has any idea what they intend to do with them.
These 9 were put on display at the request of the community so that the public could learn some of the significance. They're extremely significant because of their association with the Bora ceremonies, and also because the traditional knowledge from those ceremonies is still within the community.
The Bora carvings were moved to Collymongal 60 years ago and until recently stood in the grounds of the station homestead.
To us it's like a missing person, and I'm surprised myself that a lot of the young people have stressed just that to me. They feel that we have to do something now about what do we do, how do we protect them.
It was to have been a routine bike ride after the trio had finished work yesterday at a nearby power station. They were riding south along the New England Highway from Musselrook when they travelled onto a narrow bridge at Sawyers Gully.
There was a truck travelling in the same direction south. There was a collision between the truck and the cyclists. As a result, 2 of the cyclists were thrown over the Armageddon rail, and ultimately both those persons were deceased.
31-year-old Bradley Andrew Maund of the Lake Macquarie suburb of Cardiff South and 35-year-old Gary William Collins from Thornton near Maitland were killed. The third rider suffered bruises and cuts and was in deep shock. The freak accident has stunned the sporting community. Maund was a champion triathlete, seen here winning the Gloucester King of the Mountain 2 years ago.
It's a tragedy the family of the victims never want repeated. They've made a plea for all drivers to be more aware, to give cyclists more space.
People who operate vehicles, be them motor vehicles or heavy vehicles, need to give cyclists and slower vehicles like cycles a little bit of clearance, because it's a very fine line between life and death.
The New England Highway is the main inland route north and carries heavy vehicles. Police have urged drivers to take caution.
We don't want police having to knock on any more doors at Christmas with tragic news such as this.
Police are continuing to interview the truck driver. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
It's been a long journey for Bill Burns and his wife Joan, but today they drove through the gates of the Mater Hospital at Waratah with more than a thank you. They raised $10,000 for the oncology unit by completing a 2,200 kilometre trip from Adelaide to Alice Springs in their Model T Ford. How did the car hold up?
Beautifully. Half an hour's maintenance every night and not even a flat tyre for the whole trip.
Bill decided to raise money for the hospital after they successfully treated his cancer.
I had a stomach and liver lymphoma, which was treated by chemotherapy, and after 6 months, here I am.
While he wanted to give some financial assistance back to the Mater, he also wanted to give other cancer patients hope.
I hope that by doing this it would give some hope to people who are currently diagnosed with cancer that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and you can beat the disease.
Jane Anderson, NBN News.
Belmont, led by Newcastle captain Mark Curry, will host the one-day final at Carl Oval against Wallsend. While Belmont is a slight favourite, Wallsend, with the services of former Shield cricketers Greg Geese and Steve Story, can't be underestimated.
I think at the moment they're the two form sides in Newcastle cricket. They both played very well last Sunday. The cricket in the semi-finals was really good standard and some excellent batting particularly, and I'm sure Sunday's game will produce some very good cricket.
Meantime, the Tooheys Hunter Valley Solo Classic will be held at the Newcastle Motordrome tomorrow night. The quality field has attracted riders from across the region and Sydney, with Chris Watson and Stephen Davies expected to fight it out. Also on the program, the state's top sidecar riders and the V8 sedans in round 4 of the Top Gun series.
This map shows the preferred route identified by the consultants who prepared the EIS. Of 5 options, it's the most direct, linking Fingal Bay with the intersection of Gangan Road and Nelson Bay Road. It would cut through this land owned by the Hunter Water Corporation and the Warramai Land Council.
It doesn't adequately take into account the impact that is going to have on water quality and on the fauna and flora in the area, specifically on the large koala colonies that are in here.
The EIS lists 12 endangered animal species which inhabit the area. The 3.7 kilometre stretch would begin as a 2-lane road and be upgraded to a 4-lane dual carriageway when needed. Council says up to 5,000 vehicles a day will use the proposed road.
Those vehicles would be able to run straight through to Fingal Bay and the environment there without going through that people-rich area.
For several years, the National Parks and Wildlife Service has been pushing the state government to increase the size of Tomaree National Park. Conservationists say if this route is approved, it will drastically reduce the area of land that could be included in any future expansion.
I believe that the real purpose of the road going through in the point that it is and not closer to the existing housing developments is that they want to open up the area for additional housing.
Council has stressed it's yet to examine the proposal in detail. Submissions are being called for and the EIS will be on display for public comment until late January. Joanne Shoebridge, NBN News.